Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Ashoka conversation today with Purvi Shah, founder and executive director of the Movement Law Lab. Ms. Shah has founded several organizations, including Law for Black Lives, and serving as the founding director of the Bertha Justice Institute at the Center for Constitutional Rights, and the co-founder of the Community Justice Project for Florida Legal Services. Ms. Shah has run movement lawyering workshops at law schools and various organizations all over the place, and has a long history of working by, for, and with community. She is the prior recipient of an Ashoka Fellowship, an Echoing Green Fellowship, the Soros Equality Fellowship, the Harvard Law School Wasserstein Fellowship, the East Bay Community Law Center's Justice Award, the ACLU's Rodney Thaxton Award for Racial Justice, and the Community Justice Project's Community Defender Award, among many others. We're so honored to have her here with us today to talk about how law students can get involved in this kind of work, what we can do to further the goals of movement lawyering, and ways that we can learn more about how to support community justice goals in our law school and legal careers. So welcome, Ms. Shah. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Excited to meet all of you and talk law and movements.
Yes, it can be really fun. So if it's all right with everyone, we'll just go around real quick and all of the Ashoka interns can introduce themselves briefly so you know who you're talking to. I'm Erin. I'm a second-year law student at UCLA School of Law, specializing in public interest law and policy and critical race studies. I came to law school from my job as an associate editor for Nonprofit Quarterly, and I'm hoping to get involved in work similar to what you have done in the past. Isabel, would you like to go next?
Yes, hi, thank you so much, Purvi, for being here. My name is Isabel Martin. I was a 1L at New York Law School, and I am happy to announce that I'll now be going to Pace Law University in New York, White Plains. And I am passionate about environmental law, so that is definitely the path that I would like to go down. But I do also pride myself in being a human rights advocate, and I'm also part of the Women's Council on Energy and the Environment in DC. And I also went to the College of Charleston for my undergraduate degree.
Thanks, Isabel. Anu?
Hello, I'm Anu Lingapa. I'm a rising 3L at UC Hastings in San Francisco. I'm most interested in criminal justice reform and science and technology policy, which I think are very different things that have substantial overlap.
Thank you. And Hannah?
Hi, I'm Hannah Edmonds. I'm a rising 2L at George Washington University Law School, and I have an interest in privacy and cyber law, and specifically some of the intersections with the exploitation of immigrant information. So there's a lot of work behind that I would like to get involved with pro bono or nonprofit perspective there.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. So we will now get started on our conversation. Ms. Shah, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, why you went to law school, some early experiences, what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, well, nice to learn a little bit about each of you. I think I like to start off by I think how I orient myself to my work really starts with sort of who I am and where I come from, right? So I'm first generation American, daughter of immigrants, grandmothers who didn't have more than a 5th grade education. My parents have a typical immigrant story, have had a variety of experiences. My dad used to own or run a bodega. My uncle started the first Indian grocery store in our hometown of Miami. And, my mom was a young, albeit she didn't know she was a young feminist who fought to go and have the life she wanted and the education she wanted. So that's a bit about like my people and who I come from, and sort of, the people I try to bring into every room that I'm in. And then I would say like some of the identities that I think, in this moment of time where we're so grounded in the need to heal the wound of racial injustice in this country, I feel like it's also really important to name sort of who you are and the identities you try to represent. So, I identify as a woman of color. I'm South Asian, Indian American. I grew up in Florida. So I'm also, in Miami. So for anyone who's from Miami, shout out to the Southwest, Sawasera, an 80s kid. And then I think it's also important to name political identities, in this moment. So I am a person of color who is committed to Black liberation. I see myself as a leftist and an internationalist. I believe it's really important to connect struggles across the world. And hey, Annette, nice to see you. So I'll maybe pause there just so Annette can also say hello, and then I can share a bit more about how I got where I am and sort of what my journey was to sort of social justice lawyering. So.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Purvi. Really happy to hear you. I was on another call, urgent call, so sorry I'm joining late. I'm Global Legal Director at Ashoka, and I think I saw that Anna's in the audience, but I founded this idea of the SELT internship program, and then Anna Pfeifenberger was with us at Ashoka for the past year, helping to implement the program in this first year. Sounds like people are also sharing where they're from. And so I was born in Liberia. I identify as a Pan-African. I then moved to Portland, Oregon when I was 12 years old, and my immediate family lives there. So I have really strong ties to Portland as well, and now live in Virginia. I don't know what my political leanings are. Maybe I'm a centrist, but probably very left leaning in a lot of my politics. Actually, yeah, left leaning, but I don't know what that means, because I don't think human rights should be anywhere far from that, right? So yeah, and I'm happy to have this conversation.
Thanks, Annette. And I didn't mean to put pressure to have you say your political views. I was kind of doing that more for myself. But yeah, I would say I had sort of an unlikely journey to being a lawyer. I certainly did not grow up thinking that that was a career that I wanted to do. I think I was really curious about the world, and through seeing what my parents went through, as first-generation Americans, as people who struggled at times financially, certainly dealt with a range of things in their workplaces, including, either being underestimated, being talked down to, at times being discriminated against, just the way that if you're a person of color and you are in this camp in America that is the other in America, you cannot help but to look through that lens at the world. And then also to look at your community, and see that, like, despite what I went through or what I experienced, if you looked, like, opportunity, talent was meted out equally, and yet opportunity wasn't. And so I think kind of as a young person, I didn't really have words for those things. I just sort of observed them and knew that they didn't feel right. They didn't match, like, the values that I grew up with, or what my parents grew up with, or what they instilled in me. And it just sort of became this, like, okay, some people have and some people don't. And power, the question of power, of just like, who has the ability to make choices even in your personal world, in your community, or sort of broader in society. And I think I was sort of just always observant and curious about those questions. And when I went to college, by that time, I was sort of starting to form and put ideas and being exposed more to history, and had the great fortune in college of studying under Alden Morris, the great civil rights historian. And I was really interested in questions of social policy and poverty, right? Just out of this observation, and what didn't feel right, didn't feel like the way the world should look, now trying to study it and understand it. And as I got into that, I really was captured by, I really felt fascinated by these people in history that, were just, looked like everyday people, looked like me and you, but who had done, like, sort of the most amazing things. And some of them were known for it and many weren't. And I think this question of courage and how people can work together to challenge like the hardest things in their lives, like that question really sat with me. And I really felt moved by that and inspired by those stories. And so that kind of started a curiosity about social movements and organizing. And I was a student organizer in college and worked on a variety of campaigns on my college, including like the Fight for Ethnic Studies, the fight, strangely, to celebrate Martin Luther King Day, which, you know, now 20 plus years ago wasn't celebrated on every campus, and worked around sort of students of color and solidarity between different types of students of color. And all that kind of cut my teeth with what it was like to be an organizer, what it was like to be a woman in leadership, which, you know, is frankly not respected most of the time. But more importantly was me kind of experimenting with like with these challenges that are enduring, intractable, at times daunting, like what do you do about them? And I also experimented with different roles, like went and worked on at a civil rights lobbying firm on the Hill and kind of saw that world, and then went and also worked for like a legal services organization. And I felt like it was a time of experimentation, maybe not familiar to many of us, right? It's like we don't come with like a blueprint, and frankly, if it was easy, we wouldn't have to be committed to the struggle for social change or for human dignity. And so for me, that period was really just curiosity, exploring, understanding, putting words, looking at history, looking at what other people had done, being inspired by that, asking hard questions of myself of like, well, who would I have been had I been around at a different point in history? And I think that, you know, I kind of came to the end of college and I really wasn't sure the direction I wanted to go in. And you know, I do have immigrant parents, and they were like, you should go to law school. My dad actually, funnily enough, always used to say, you argue a lot, you should consider going to, which is what we say to strong-willed little women. But it planted a seed for me, and I decided to go to law school. I took a year off because I really didn't feel completely clear about what I was trying to get out of it. And you know, I think that was a wise decision made by a very young person. And I took a year off because I got in, which I knew I was going to go to law school, but I just didn't know exactly what I was trying to get out of it. So I took a year off and I ended up organizing and being a part of a community organization in my hometown, where I really understood in a much deeper way what community organizers are doing. And I had a chance to run a youth organizing project. And I kind of set up a little bit of like a social justice boot camp for myself. I decided I was going to read like these 30 books and like just really like I felt this drive to have more purpose as I walked in to law school. So then I went to law school, and that kind of armed me with a lot of clarity that I was going in there for social justice. I was already had the bug around organizing. I believed in the power of organized groups of people. I believed that people directly closest to the problems should be part of crafting, if not the leading edge of crafting those solutions. So those common sense things had already been sort of instilled. And now I was like, okay, now I'm here to learn some skills and to come back to a community. And I will say on the eve of kind of, you know, the months before it was time to go to law school, I was like, I don't want to go to law school. I want to be an organizer. And I was just like, why would I, you know, I was like, this is how you change the world. Why do I want to go to law school? And it was really the organizers, more elder organizers that I worked with, that sat me down and said, no, we don't actually have lawyers we trust. We don't have lawyers that know what we're trying to do, that would respect us and our leadership. So you got in, we didn't, you better go to law school. And so that also was a clarifying kind of charge for me. It was like, okay, now I'm being sent to learn something, to get access to something that not everybody has had access to. So now it really sort of made me feel a different sense of responsibility and a different sense of openness to really go and collect whatever I could to bring back to the struggles and the communities that I felt so committed to. So we can talk more about like the rest, you know, what, you know, now it's been like 18 years since I walked through, you know, the doors of law school, but maybe I'll let Erin kind of probe further.
Thank you so much for sharing that. What an incredible story. And, you know, I guess I have more questions in my list about your law school experience, but I guess one question that came to me while you were talking was, do you ever stop and think about the fact that all these figures you were learning about in college, people who looked and seemed ordinary, but who did these amazing things? Was there a point when you realized that you are in fact now one of those people who's founded all these organizations, who's done so much to help community? How have you developed a conceptualization of yourself as someone who can take on those roles?
I think that's an interesting question, and I'll have to say this week Bob Moses passed away, the one of the sort of integral heroic organizers of the civil rights movement, the architect of Freedom Summer, a person who I was, lucky enough to have a personal audience with a few times and very important times in my life. And I think this is the thing. The trick is you have to both recognize that it is ordinary people, and without an ego, realize that we have responsibility to fight for the things that are most important, that the fight for human dignity is one that we must all be a part of, that there is no tapping out of that, right? It is, you either benefit from the status quo or you work against it, and you figure out how to build a world that's more just and equitable for everyone. But the trick is to never build your self-conception to a point of ego. And Dr. Moses was such a brilliant example of this, is that ultimately you must understand your place in the ecosystem, right? As a person with elite education and a lawyer, like, I'm not the protagonist of the story. I'm not the person the story should center around. Despite me playing my role, like if you think about social justice as a team sport, like I have a role to play on the team. And in fact, it may be pretty important. I may be able to block some things. I may be able to clear the path, but ultimately, like, I'm not holding the ball or running the ball, right? And so, and this is like very funny considering I don't really play those sports, but we'll use the sports analogies. But basically, like, for me, it's like the self-conceptualization that is really important for anyone committed to social justice, particularly those of us that will have elite education and elite skills, despite where you come from. Once you get this degree, you move into what society deems as an expert, or a person who should be speaking, or a person who has somehow extra knowledge, when, what my life and my work has taught me is that the wisdom and the brilliance of working class people of color who are dealing with a lot of these problems, like, that's who I want to be at their shoulder, at their back. And so I think it is that dual consciousness of both, like, I have a responsibility. I won't shirk from that, and I won't be so falsely humble to think that I haven't done things of value or of importance. And that challenge myself to be ambitious, to dream big, and to build, and in the spirit of a Bob Moses who was mentored by the great Ella Baker, in the spirit of that, our communities are leaderful. And like, if you are lucky enough to create the kinds of institutions or the kinds of work or projects that can build space for the leadership of others, like, that is the responsibility. And that's the role that I've accepted for myself, and that I really understood as the integral infrastructure of fights for social justice, is that no single person is all that important. But if you can be a part of channeling the contributions of many, of making space for the leadership of those who should be at the center of the story, of flanking them with a law degree and protecting and defending and making space for that work, then that is a valuable role to be playing in social justice.
Thank you. I have one more question, then I'd like to move to hear from some of our other interns. This question just kind of stems from what you were just saying, which is, how you would describe movement lawyering for someone who is not familiar with the concept, whether that person is a law student or perhaps, a lay person who only, might not have a clear grasp of the distinction between traditional and movement lawyering practice.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the starting point for something like movement lawyering, the first thing is to just start with law in general, right? And this idea, and this is not a surprise to all of us on this call that are law students or lawyers, is that law is intertwined with like every part of our lives, for better, for worse, and certainly for poor and working class people, like even more so, right? Like so many of our decisions, so many of our institutions, the daily life functions through the law. And that secondly, even in the middle of this critical race studies sort of brouhaha that's happening, the reality is that law has been a tool and for the white, the wealthy, and the powerful. That law is not separate from society and the way societal norms. I mean, it was many of the things that we find perverse in our society were absolutely legal, right? So law is a malleable tool that has at times shifted to adjust to societal norms, but societal norms are certainly not the most egalitarian, progressive, or rooted in transformation or liberation. And so the truth is that to me, movement lawyering starts with understanding that truth, that this sort of false objectivity of law, the story, the mythology that we're told of law as the neutral, rational, objective, and that judges and the people who wage the tool of law are also neutral and rational and objective. Like, that's just false. And I can say that, certainly as a non-lawyer, as just a person of color living in America, I can also tell you that as an expert in the law, right? And so this, to me, movement lawyering starts from a radical understanding and a radical clarity about law's origins. Now, at the same time, while we have a sober understanding of the origins of law, about how it's been used to preserve power relationships in society, to protect and allow certain people to exploit and benefit off other people in our society, and a myriad of other ways that social relations happen, there's also a radical vision for the law. And that's also something that movement lawyering is rooted in, that we believe law can be transformed from the architecture of oppression into a building block, not the sort of the everything for social justice, but it is actually can be used as a tool in the fight for social justice. And so, that when we think about democracy, right, when we think about the broadest things that we want to dismantle oppression, to facilitate engagement in civic process, to build alternatives that are not punitive, right? And this sort of dialogue we're having right now about abolition and about our criminal justice system or injustice system, that how we think law can actually be a tool for expanding democracy. It can be a tool for advancing the liberatory visions that are coming from our communities. And that in that movement, lawyers themselves, like, we have power, we have cultural power in society. We have, we have a range of types of power in society, and that lawyers, if we're more vocally committed to social responsibility and social justice, we could also be part of that sort of transformational arc towards something different, right? And that we can help build a vision that's contagious or effervescent or speaks to like the hearts and the minds, right? So one, it's like law is not neutral, rational, fair, or objective. It's been a tool primarily for the interests of the powerful and the wealthy. And it's possible to use law in an alternative way. So that's sort of like, I would say, a starting point for movement lawyering. A couple of other things that movement lawyering, which, certainly is not a new way of thinking about law. Our lineage comes from from many movements of the past, movements in different parts of the world. Lawyers have always been a part of fights for social change. But I think coining it, claiming it, staking a pole in the ground and saying this is a valid way to approach law, this is a way that many of us are choosing to guide our legal work, that's newer, right? That's an evolution of the last decade or so. But the other things that movement lawyering really believes is that social change requires not just changing law, but shifting culture, power, and systems, right? That we can't, there's a lot of public interest lawyers, civil rights lawyers, those are not new, but we have a different theory of change, which says that we don't just believe changing the law then change society. History tells us that that's not true, right? The facts are that you can win Brown v. Board of Education, and our schools can be more segregated today than they were in the 1960s, right? So that tells us that it's more than law that has to actually be addressed to transform society. It also believes that social movements create social change, that we need organized groups of people and democratic process, masses of people is how we transform society. And then we also believe that those movements are powered by people that are closest to the problems, that there's a role for many of us, like I said, everybody has to get in the game, but they must be led, and the leadership of those movements must be working class folks, must be Black folks, must be immigrants, must be people that are closest to those problems. And that we still say there's a role for fighting in the terrain of law, and that law is an important arena in which we try to win. I would say I like to use a term that it's a terrain of struggle. It doesn't always follow that you win a case, you win something in the world. You might, but you might not. And so that's why we're being strategic about how we use law. Sometimes, success without victory was something at my previous legal organization, Center for Constitutional Rights. That was one of the sort of mottos, that we can have success without victory in the courts, because sometimes what you're challenging in the courts is pretty daunting, right? So anyways, all that to say is that movement lawyers see law as in relationship to the rest of the world. Well, I think sometimes other legal training kind of puts you in a tunnel, and it kind of makes you think everything is controlled by the law, when in reality, there's all these other forces at play. And so we movement lawyers are really clear about that. And then we want to collaborate with other types of change makers, and then fit law into the puzzle of the range of strategies and tactics we use to create change. So I'll say that. I mean, there's more to say about movement lawyering, but I feel like that might be just more than enough. And I'd love to hear I see a couple hands, and maybe there's some questions, and want to kind of hear what you all are thinking.
Thank you for that. I mean, I certainly can't say it was more than enough. I could listen to you talk about this all day long, but I do want to get to some of the questions from the other interns. Hannah, I think your hand was up first.
Yeah, thank you. So this sort of goes in line with what you were saying about how people have different roles they can play in these movements, and law is just one of those tools. And something that I've noticed that is an undercurrent in recent events and movements are people who are parts of communities who have not been typically oppressed wanting to be allies, which is great. But how do you see movement lawyering combating performative allyship, and what does that look like? Because there's a lot of, at least I've seen, especially on social media, people push this messaging, but it's like, is there really heart behind that? Are you actually doing things where you're actually acting on what you are presenting yourself to be? How do we use something like movement lawyering to combat that?
It's such a great question, Hannah, and I really appreciate it, because we are in a time of virtue signaling and a lot of performative allyship, while everything stays exactly the same, right? And so to me, there is no way a movement lawyer can, first of all, I think, and we're sort of facing, I mean, movement lawyering is something that was really marginal. No one really talked, no one claimed it. No one wanted to even be it. And 10 years later, most law schools have a class on it, and people are now walking out of law school saying, I'm a movement lawyer and I want to be a movement lawyer. And I appreciate that. And I think there is always something positive in people aspiring to be in a particular role in the world. And movement lawyering is a term that is earned. You don't get to claim to be any movement's lawyer, or to be, protecting or defending movements just because you anointed yourself that comes out of commitment and work. And I think the key, and we are now getting into this, a lot of the work that I do around training and working with legal organizations that are curious and want to adapt to this way of working and thinking, is that there are many competencies to being a movement lawyer. And we've got to get beyond just monikers and start to talk really about competencies, skills, qualities, right? And so, being a movement lawyer is about being accountable to outcomes, right? it is not enough for me to say that I just want to work alongside movements. Like I also have to be accountable. Like, are we winning tangible change in people's lives? Are we shifting power relationships in society? And are we changing a person's sense or individual's sense of their own power? So I always talk about movement lawyering having, for lack of a better term, a triple bottom line, that we care about all three of those things, because to me, that's the only way we are actually moving the needle on transforming problems. Second, I think you just have to have an above ground commitment to centering the leadership of people most impacted. There is no way you are not the star of the story. And I say this to, and this is complicated. The law is an incredibly undiverse field. Only 5% of the legal profession are people of color, and movement lawyering in particular in my work, we certainly center and we believe that people who are more proximate to communities, like the fact that I come from an immigrant family or that I have been evicted means that I am going to be different in how I talk to a client about that, right? That also doesn't mean that I know still what's better for that person or that I should be making decisions, right? It's like, so to me, it is about this dance of like both. We must diversify the law. We must change who has the tool of law, because that is absolutely central to how we think about these problems. It is not confusing to me to care about organized groups of people, because I've seen that play out time and time again in my life. I'm not operating from the highest point of privilege. And movement lawyers still also need to recognize that we are still maybe not the center of the story. And that's a challenging thing sometimes from lawyers that are coming from communities they're working in. And so, the story is still to be written on that. And some of that will be written by those lawyers, right? What is the dance? Are you representing the community? Are you part of the community? I think the answer is both. And it's like learning how to have boundaries and all of that. But I think so, an unabashed commitment to centering the people most impacted and checking that, like if being an ally is important and necessary. I say being an accomplice is important and necessary, like a step beyond. Like I'm not here to just support somebody else's work. I'm here because I absolutely believe that I have a responsibility to this and that my liberation is tied up in other people's, right? So that's a subtle difference, but one that changes out of performative allyship to accountability, a responsibility. And then it's not all like about making sure you don't step on toes, but it is about being grounded and centered in who you are, right? Like I always say that, like, it's not about being perfect. It's not about, I've made 1,000 mistakes. And that just comes with the territory of any hard work. So your goal isn't to be so afraid that you don't actually, it's a step up and it's a move up and a move back. Always, it's a dance. And the idea is getting better and better and better at figuring out when it's your responsibility to take a step forward and actually do more, and when it's the right thing to actually move back and let people lead, right? And so anyways, that's sort of a lot about that. I know we have a couple more questions.
Thank you so much.
That was great. Thank you, Bisha. I don't remember who was next, so we're just going to go in reverse order from introductions. Anu, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, so I think going through law school, it's like designed to be a very de-radicalizing process. And I imagine that like once you actually enter into the field of law, like the more experience you get, the more like your sense of like self-worth or like professional value is tied to the system existing. Because like if it doesn't exist or if it gets dismantled, then you can't help anybody navigate it. You're not any better than anybody else.
You're out of a job, Anu.
So I was wondering, like, what's your advice for holding on to lefty values and or like non-hierarchical values while also trying to fit yourself into that box so that you can use it while it exists to help people, but also not let your mind get tricked into losing your values?
It's such a great question. And I think it's so honest, and it certainly mirrors my experience, and I think you're exactly right. Like law school isn't designed to teach us how to be social change advocates, right? Ultimately, that's a disruptive role in society. And despite while there are amazing faculty, amazing classes, and I will certainly say I had training in law school that was really valuable to my work. It's not assembled in a way that's pointing you in the direction of what you're trying to do. So one, I think this starting with a very clarity. Law school is not going to put it all on a silver platter for you. It's not going to roll out the red carpet for you to change power relationships in society, for you to get at the hardest things in our society. So one, going in eyes wide open and sort of saying, okay, now I'm going to have to take a bit of ownership about my experience here. And part of that, like you're saying, Anu, is preserving your values. I say one of the most important things you can do early on in your law school career is write down what are the values that are most important to you, and check in on them, and really hold yourself to saying, okay, like, be discerning. Like, part of law school is it's so overwhelming. I feel like as the first person in my family to go to law school, I certainly did not feel confident or capable a lot of the time in law. I mean, it's like designed to make you not feel smart. And the truth is later on, I was like, oh, I am smart. It's just not designed to make you feel that way. So some of it was treating law school, like I had a moment where I sort of started off very disoriented and having that cognitive dissonance of like, I came here to learn about justice and I feel like I'm learning about oppression and I don't feel smart and no one's talking about the things I want to talk about. And then I had a flip moment where I was like, all right, how can I use this experience to practice? How can I build my confidence? How can I put myself in spaces where I flex the muscles that I'm trying to develop? So one, I would say that, so first is eyes wide open. Second is treat it like sparring practice. Second is values. And third, treat it like sparring practice. Fourth is get out of the classroom. Like you will learn. And I feel two ways about this. Like my law school experience was I ran as far as I could. Like I did as many things in the community, as many clinics as I could possibly do, which I think are important. And, 15 years later, like the actual classes I took were really important too. Contracts, land use, corporations, federal courts, like these are things that really were valuable to me as a strategist for movement. So you've got to kind of do what you need to do to keep your politics, keep the fire and the flame going, and also recognize your fight is not within the 3 years that you're in law school. So you got to kind of do both of those at the same time. Get what you're trying to get out of it, nourish yourself through relationships, through people that are not in law school that are going to kind of keep you clear, participate in movements, be a volunteer. You don't have a lot of time, but like sweep up the floor and put the chairs out and just listen and be a part. So you have grounding. You have ground under your feet outside of just what you're learning in school. And I think that will really help you you need to keep your eye on the prize. And this is very much where, political elders, the sort of folks that know your why. If you know your why as to why you're there, that really helps you navigate the sort of windy path that law school takes you on. Yep.
Thank you, Ms. Shah. That's a great answer. And I definitely relate to the experience of being in a classroom and thinking, oh my gosh, I came here to learn about justice and I'm learning about oppression. What is happening? So I appreciate that. Isabel, I think you were our first intro, so you'll be our third round question.
Thank you, Erin. So I have a question. So I would like to know what initiative or project that you have worked on, either if it's in the past or present, that you feel like you have maybe made the most movement in as a woman of color, some initiative that you think that maybe maybe you feel like hasn't really, it's not finished, but something that you feel like you've made the most progress in, that you feel like you've really made some change in?
Yeah, I mean, progress is, the arc, what we're trying to achieve is it's generational. So I would say some of the work that I feel most that I would say felt like the closest to my heart and felt like was really powerful. I would say they're two different, very different contexts. One was a range of work that I did early in my career, in the first 6 years of my legal career, representing a lot of working class tenants in Miami, Florida, and building tenant unions and representing taxi drivers, and like just really felt this sense of, it really just grounded me in what was most important, being in those fights and really learning how to blend law with organizing and taking and being everyone's lawyer, and just having like figuring out, like, it's not a, while I teach now about movement lawyering, nothing teaches you more than practice. So those early years of practice, and I was very lucky to be mentored by my mentor, who's a veteran movement lawyer, Chuck Elsesser, and those intergenerational conversations, the sort of, the naivete of me and my sort of like, headstrong, needing to learn things for myself, but always having this guidance and the steady hand nearby. So I would say those early years for me are so foundational, and I don't think any lawyer who's interested in social change can ever replace those kinds of experiences. I also represented the same groups for 6 years. So the longitudinal work, the long-term work, if you're in episodic, like now you see a lot of lawyers and movements and not movements, but organizations that are like, we did this one case with this organization, which I think that can be useful, but it is transactional to some extent. And so this idea of like long distance running, representing the same community through a variety of things, having to be a jack of all trades, having to constantly face the limitations of your knowledge and skill and still step up to the plate, those things are irreplaceable, right? My mentor always used to say to me, like, you better be comfortable being uncomfortable and never let your limitations be the limitations of your client. So I really had to work out my sort of insecurities, the way that I was clouded by myself. Like, it's not about me. I'm just here to be like, I am in service of something. So how can I sharpen myself as much as possible? And how can I also like step up every time that's needed, right? So I would say that's one period. I would say the second period was in Ferguson and beyond. And really, like, to me, the power and the importance of supporting this new iteration of the Black freedom struggle in our country, and that sort of rare moment that happens in life where you're just the sort of conditions put you in a moment where you actually have you can play a significant role. And the people that had poured training into me, the civil rights elders that I had the opportunity to learn with or learn from, I feel like I just was in the right place at the right time. And I was in an institute, like a variety of factors came together, many of which didn't have to do with me, but were just how these things unfold, the alchemy of the situation. And so I feel like building the Ferguson Legal Defense Committee, really seeing what this new formation of the Black freedom struggle, and to have even a small role in supporting that and nurturing it and helping the formation of the movement for Black lives and helping build law for Black lives. And now we're like, 8 years later, 8 years, 2014. Yeah. So and seeing just what's been possible, right? We're talking about abolition in a popular discourse. We maybe aren't quite yet winning it, but we have the conversation about has changed drastically. And some of those leaps were made by a lot of these folks that have led in this last period of time. So to me, that it's just the greatest honor to be a part of those fights and to have played my role and to have played it, as best as I could with the skills and the knowledge I had, knowing that you constantly can, do better. But feeling like building Law for Black Lives, which is now run and sort of, in the stratosphere, taken by a bunch of other people who are leading that and building that into shaping it to what makes sense for them. But to me, like I will say, like, being an entrepreneur is not really an identity that I really related to. My dad had a small business, my grandfather, you know, like I never really got that. And then I was like, oh, this is how this comes out for me, is I am totally not afraid to start things. And so getting to be in the right squad and the right place where I could help start things that other people can then take to another place, like that to me is work I'm really proud of.
Thank you. I love that your sort of family history of entrepreneurship and starting things has really come out for you specifically in your work. Who knew? But that's so, I mean, I'm sure that they're so proud to see that legacy continuing in this way. And I love what you said about not letting your personal limitations limit what's possible for your clients and the people you're working with. I think that's really great to keep in mind. Annette, I see, has a question. Annette.
It feels more like a comment/question. Listening to you, this idea of movement lawyering, it's interesting when you say it's not about you, because it still places you in the center, in the sense that you're not standing in front and having everyone follow you, but a lot of the ideas that you've been expressing tied to so many different things that you really are in the center. Your comment about legal education, for example, we've been talking about change maker lawyering and you know the changes that need to occur in legal education to prepare us to be change maker lawyers. And so yeah, I wonder about this idea of you being at the center and that not being a bad thing. If you're going to be working with what's it called, Law for Black Lives, if you're working on all of these different topics that touch on so many different issues, and in a way, how do you create mentorship and networking with all of these different groups? Because you can be a resource, I feel like, to so many different movements because of where you sit, and you in your allyship, you can impact and educate and lead in a lot of ways, even if you're not at the forefront of that particular issue.
Yeah, Annette, I think it's a great question. And I think the way I see it is I split vision from like being central, right? And I don't mean to, I'm not a falsely humble person. I know what my mission is, I know what my purpose is, and I work ambitiously towards it. And I do feel like building the field of movement lawyering, changing the way the legal landscape looks, right? We have, you know, only 97% of American lawyers do not work on issues of justice and poverty, right? The amount of people that have legal issues, like, and that cannot get any assistance, like, those are the things that I am committed to. And I know that I do play a central role in that transformative arc. I think, to me though, like, the model that I use and that has most inspired me, and I feel so tender about it right now with the loss of Bob Moses, is I do believe in the Ella Baker tradition. And I do really believe that institutions matter, people matter. And so my vision is ambitious, but I am constantly trying to build the space and the institutions that can survive me, right? Like this. So to me, that's the tweak on it, right? And I have taken seriously mentoring many people, and was really lucky and honored to hold at the Center for Constitutional Rights our Ella Baker internship program, which was named in relationship to Miss Baker, but was really about building this new generation of lawyers who could work alongside our people. And I've sort of scaled that in many ways through my work and our work building the Movement Law Lab. And we are a resource to many movements, not just the movement for Black Lives, but we are working with a range of movements to support building legal capacity and a legal muscle into them. But I guess all of that is to say, it would not be satisfying if I went 40 more years of my life and I looked back and all I could claim was what I did with my own two hands. And I think that is always what has pushed me to think bigger and to continue to build this concept of movement lawyering, and to have it be owned by many people, and to have it be something that is so it is so powerful that people want to be that, right? like in the same way I was so influenced by all of these people that I looked at and I said, wow, like that's powerful. Like I am just one movement lawyer, but there are many other, lot of women of color, Black women, like folks who are not like, we don't know their stories. They're not lifted up. And so to me, that's what I feel passionate about. I feel passionate about building networks of cohering people that are thinking in transformative ways about law, creating the right spaces for us to think together. We are building the global network of movement lawyers, and our organization, which is lawyers in 25 countries that are on the front lines of supporting movements all around the world. So I guess all of that is to say, to me, it's like, yes, again, like I believe in I've learned to trust my own vision. I claim being a visionary in some way, and my vision is meaningless if other people aren't a part of it and don't take it on as their own.
Thanks. I'm just going to say one thing before moving to the next comment or question, but I really hope there's space and capacity to build student chapters of movement, movement lawyering, so that, there are a lot of us who go to law school with that vision of wanting to be movement lawyers, but without the space there, it can be hard to know the direction we're heading in without, something to tether us outside.
Well, one plug I'll make is Law for Black Lives recently released a membership. They now, you can actually join Law for Black Lives and become a member, and they will be doing a bunch of programming for members. So, that feels like one of my like movement babies that's out there, that's now a teenager doing its own thing. But I feel like, yes, having a home, having a place, a political home where you can engage in these ideas. For other people, the National Lawyers Guild has played that. For other people, the National Conference of Black Lawyers has played that role. So the institutions and the places for you to deepen this. And then our organization, we offer a lot of training programs, a lot of opportunities to learn and dialogue with other people that want to work in this way. So yes, if you're interested in this, you've got to get in the squad somehow. This, again, is not like solo work. So you also joining community organizations is another way. We talk so much about community organizing, and it's just like join those groups. And actually, that's another way for you to get really grounded and clear about what you're trying to accomplish. So I appreciate that push and encourage people to join some of these groups that I think are espousing and holding movement lawyering at their heart, like with Law for Black Lives.
Thank you. And I love that you describe it as one of your babies, but I think it really does, it highlights that, this field of lawyering feels really personal to people, right? Like it's not a job that you just go to, like these things that you build are really part of who you are and who you want to be to the world. And I love how you express that.
Just one last thing on that. I mean, another elder who has been just has like sometimes these nuggets, like Harry Belafonte once said that, like, if you're not finding the joy in this, like you're missing the plot, like as much as we talk about the fight and the struggle and the, like, it's hard and you're trying to figure out your role and use your skills in service of the people, ultimately, it's so beautiful to be a part of these transformative fights, and it's joyful. And I've had amazing times, dancing on dance floors and, laughing and, and that tingle you get on the back of your neck when people stand up for what's right. And you do that with other people and something amazing happens that you didn't think that was possible to happen until folks banded together. Right. And so that's what really keeps me in this, the sort of, again, I got to bring Bob Moses back, but, he was instrumental in Fannie Lou Hamer speaking at the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party convention. And there are Fannie Lou Hamers in every community. And those moments where I've gotten to hear that power, that insight, that clarity, like those are the moments that keep you in this work. And it's honestly relieving. Like, you don't got to figure this out yourself. You don't have to be, you don't have to change the hardest things in our world on your own. You join a movement and you be a part of it and you figure out how to be useful, and you get to share the what's hard about trying to transform our world with other people, and you get to have a ton of joy and beauty and celebration along the way.
I love that. And I think, it flies in the face of a lot of what we hear and learn from outside sources about movement lawyering, is that like there's the like single crusader who, created this massive social impact, or that, leftist policies are really harsh or critical. And I find that often actually it's a space of community joy, and that's where a lot of this work comes from. And I really appreciate you lifting that up. But I don't want to talk too much because I think Anu has another question.
Yeah.
Anu?
So I'm wondering both your thoughts from your experiences and also if any of your mentors, if you have insights. But so one thing that I found to be like such a bummer since studying law and going to law school is like before law school, like I never knew like how of like bad things in the world, like how much of them are ascribable to like malevolence or how much is just incompetence, like nobody's paying attention and things have spiraled out of control. And like since going to law school and reading cases, it's like really clear that a lot it's intentional, like a lot of time and money and effort and brain power goes into upholding oppressive systems, keeping things very unequal, like making people suffer. Like it's really bad and it's really demoralizing as someone who like wants to be on the other side of that, but just seeing like, wow, there's some victories from this side, but none of them clearly were like easily won because there's a lot up against us. And so I'm wondering if you have advice about both not getting too demoralized and how to balance also like not underestimating the other side while also not getting so like intimidated by how much there is up against us that it's like too scary to even start doing anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very familiar place. And I feel like some of the wisdom that I've picked up along the way is that to be a part of social change requires a belief that change is possible. There is no way for you to stay the course and to be a long distance runner in movements if you cannot hold on to we call it protagonism, this idea that change is possible and that the masses of people actually want a world that is better and that is more fair and is more equitable. And yes, our world is not structured that way, and we have a long road to go. But I think this is where political training, being in political community can be really helpful because look, people threw off the yoke of colonialism. People went to Freedom Summer and people died for those things, right? It's like, it is not without cost. We are not naive about what we are fighting. And that is where courage and training and strategy come into play. Like I'm not for, that's why I've studied social change so much. And I've looked to the elders and I've tried to become a good strategist is because, and develop my politics and looked at history, right? It's that you've both got to have a sense of possibility that you've just got to commit to. Like you cannot claim to be a leftist or a social change person. It is fundamental to our work is to believe in the transformative possibility, right? And we're not talking about willy-nilly change. We're not talking about like, oh, if enough people go to a protest, then change will happen. We've got to be smarter and more tactical and more strategic than that, right? And then that requires studying, dissecting. Well, why did certain things happen and why did they not happen? Which types of people had to come together? How did we approach people in power? Were we running inside strategies and outside strategies? How did money come into play? Where did we use money? What kinds of institutions were built? Who were running those institutions, right? Like there is a whole other science to how we do this. And so committing yourself to actually learning, to sharpening your political instincts and your political training in community with other people is then the path forward, right? It's like the paralysis of overwhelm is real and it happens. And when you're in that place, it's time to take a little bit of a seat. It's a time to read a piece of poetry, to talk to somebody about that, to get that, to not think you can just metabolize that on your own. And the other truth is we're all living inside the trauma of the system that is not fair and doesn't work, right? And so you've got, like, to me, that's part of that's very intimate and personal, right? Like, what is your resiliency strategy? And I'll tell you, over the course of my life, like I've done different things. Sometimes I've been pretty just like powered through it. Like I will say, Ferguson years, 5 years, probably didn't take any vacation. I wasn't nurturing myself, but I was purposeful. It took a toll. My health worsened. A lot of things got worse, right? So how can you start to build habits that can also keep you in a long distance runner? So how are you taking care of your mental health? How are you taking care of your spiritual and your, whatever that is for you? How do you take care of your physical well-being, right? What are your practices to know that if you see yourself in service of something, there is no endless repository of capacity. And more importantly, how do you get in squad? This is why being on a team is so important. You've got to know when you need a break, when you don't got it right now. I can't muster the motivation and not to give yourself a pass on that, because the truth is like folks who are suffering the most don't get to just tap out, right? So I'm not in the self-care, like do what you want, whenever you want, whatever feels good. Like bringing down oppressive systems is not going to feel good while we do it. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It is a life purpose and commitment, which will mean sacrifice. What are you willing to sacrifice for that fight? And we have the right to exist and to survive and to have joy and beauty and to choose our well-being. But some of that is also choice. Like you got to cultivate that for yourself, and you got to support your peers to cultivate that for themselves, right? So care, love, this has got to be a part of how we orient to it, but rigor, precision, discipline are also parts of it.
Thank you so much. What a, I've gotten so many messages from folks on this call who are just feeling so inspired by everything that you've been saying, and even just the way that you show up in space. I think you've given us a real gift being with us today, and we're so grateful. We have one more question from the audience, but I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have?
Oh, I got it. Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. All right. David asks, he says, I'm currently a lawyer at the Impact Fund in Berkeley, former Ashoka staff member and current volunteer. I'm curious to know more about the tactics that movement lawyers can use on a day-to-day basis, especially in litigation. In particular, I've experienced firsthand the tension between seeking to make impact litigation that is client-centered, client-motivated, and actually doing it in practice, like during routine discovery, motions, etc. How can people doing litigation really adopt those movement lawyer competencies you're describing? I say this while also recognizing that litigation is a very imperfect way to make social change happen.
Very complex, but good question, David. So I think you nailed it in the end by first saying, like, are you using the right tool for the thing that you're trying to achieve? I think, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So first and foremost, I think you've got to challenge the understanding that litigation is the tool. There are many times where I've opted to do litigation, impact litigation, and there are a lot of times where I was like, this is not actually going to get the community where they want to go. Impact litigation takes a lot of time. As you're saying, there's like endless decision points inside of it. The sort of centrifugal force of litigation is entirely the law. It has nothing to do with communities and whatnot. So first, I think being good at assessing when is this the right tool to use for what communities are accomplishing. So one, you've got to be able to understand a variety of tools. Two, you have to understand what communities are trying to achieve. If you don't have either of those, you can't make a good assessment. Now, let's say you make that assessment and you decide impact litigation is strategic, it is useful. I think how you help communities understand the arc of impact litigation is really important. You got to prepare people for it. You got to be like, it's not a linear path. It's not going to necessarily get you what you want, but here's what may be possible. So then the first is like setting right expectations. I always talk about that as speaking truth about the law, right? It's a difference between saying, I don't want to be like, no, you shouldn't do that, because people are also smart. They know what impact litigation can do. So you don't want to sort of infantilize or be paternalistic to your clients, but you don't want to just cherry pick and look for, like, a lot of impact shops, and I'm going to be just, 1000%, which I always will be, is people they're looking for clients. You have an agenda, you have things you're expert in and you specialize in, and you're just looking for a client. If you're doing that, be really transparent about that. Like, that may have some marginal benefit in the world. It's not changing power relationships in society, and it's probably not necessarily is a net positive in the world, probably not transforming society. So let's just be clear about what we're trying to accomplish. Then I think, like I said, if you come to the conclusion that this is really strategic, it is what we want to do, it's what we have to offer, you've got to dissect, I think, the sort of civil procedure of that in a way where you can then identify how other tactics can layer on to the litigation, right? So yes, maybe at this motion where this is a very sort of seminal part in the case, there's probably going to be some press or there's an opportunity to do that. Well, should we do that? If it's very legalistic in nature, maybe the lawyers need to speak. If you're just trying to bring awareness to the issue, lawyers don't need to speak at that. The organizers and the community members can, right? And this gets really complicated. I can't give you writ large advice. It really depends on the context. But I just think this idea of like, what are we trying to accomplish? If what we're trying to accomplish is narrative change or people to understand the problem better, well, you better believe lawyers are usually not the best messengers for that. Like, we are wonky, we are dry, we are fact oriented, we're constrained by our rules, we don't want to give away too much for our litigation. So if that's what you're trying to do, if that's a key goal, then like let other people do that, right? Layering in other tactics to the litigation is, I think, what an impact lawyer could do better. And then decision-making and power. Now, look, I say this with not being naive about how complex litigation is. And it is not like about throwing the football to the client being like, well, you don't understand this and you don't totally get it, but you make all the decisions. That to me is also like paternalistic. Like, it's actually understanding and really giving people agency and choice and counseling. Like, all of us, to be good lawyers, have to be good counselors. So just thinking about how you can support client communities, especially for an impact case, a community of people, like to actually understand what might be, like what is happening and how they can be choiceful about the direction they want to go in. So I say that sort of just being very general without knowing more specifics about the community or the context of the case, but I guess there's a way to be a more collaborative impact lawyer, even if you're not trying to be a movement lawyer. And that, I think, understanding how you're just a better partner. We all know what it's like to be a good partner or a good community, like, and we know when we're not doing that. And a lot of times the pressure of litigation, and it's not out of being, it's not because we don't want to be good people. It's really like the pressure drives a lot of our decision making. And I think you've got to anticipate that a lot earlier on and then build in the process and the structure and the decision making that will not have the pressure of litigation make all of the decisions during your case. So David, that's the best I can do. Feel free to hit me up in some other way if we want to talk more specifics. Oh, you're on mute, Aaron.
He says that was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Well, as you know from the list I sent you earlier, I have about 15 more questions that I would love to ask you, but we are technically already over time. So instead, I will just ask if there's anything else that comes to your mind that you'd like to share or make sure is said in our conversation today.
I mean, ultimately, justice is possible. It is possible, but we should redefine what justice is and redefine what our goals are, but it is absolutely possible. And I believe that, and I'm committed, and I hope each of you are committed to being long distance runners. I look, and I am so tender in the loss of Bob Moses right now, but I look at someone who spent 86 years of their life traveling that road, started out as a young person. And I think about that, when you get to those elder years, if we're lucky, if we get to that age, how could you have spent every portion of your life in the seasons of your life in different roles and in different positions? You will not be in the same position over the course of your life, but how do you transform from this being a career to a purpose? And if you can do that, there are many of us that will nurture that purpose with you, that want to be shoulder to shoulder with you in those fights. Many of us are the product of people that have taught us and poured things into us, and we want to continue that. So just really sending a lot of appreciation for these thoughtful questions, Aaron, for your, all of the ways that you've helped create this space and asked some really good questions. Annette, for building this dope program, and next year Movement Law Lab needs some SELT interns, so I'll talk to you about that. but generally just really excited to continue having these conversations in the Ashoka community about law and transformation and change. So super grateful. And yeah, looking forward to more conversations with all of you.
I don't normally like to speak for folks, but since I got several messages, I think I can confidently say on behalf of all of us that we are walking away from you inspired and hopeful and just really passionate to move forward in this direction. So thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom with us today.
You're very welcome.
Bye,
Okay,
everyone.
bye.